Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ken Hinchcliffe. I've got the privilege of being the Warden of Trinity College at the University of Melbourne, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all here tonight for this hypothetical. I acknowledge that we're meeting today on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation. I pay respects to the elders past and present, and also acknowledge any First Nations people who are with us here today. I would also like to acknowledge the Gourlay family, who are here with us tonight for making this Ethics in Business Week possible. The Gourlay Professorship was established after a very generous endowment to Trinity College by the Gourlay family, John and Louise, in 2004. Each year since then, the college has invited an internationally distinguished professor to come to Australia and teach ethics in business to University of Melbourne students, including Trinity students. While here, they also talk to a wider range of the community, such as we're doing this evening. This year is Trinity's 150th anniversary, and to celebrate, we decided we'd invite back the Gourlay visiting professors in ethics in business to help us celebrate by having a whole week-long of events. So tonight is the third event of 5 public events, and we're delighted to have such a wonderful panel. Tomorrow evening, we're talking about modern slavery, and I'd encourage you to have a look at that agenda. And on Friday, we're talking about COVID and the ethics of COVID vaccination. So I welcome you all here this evening, and I'm sure with me, you're looking forward to a fantastic hypothetical. I'd now like to introduce our moderator and host for the evening, Ali Moore, broadcaster, journalist, and former Vice-Chancellor's Fellow at the University of Melbourne, and also, might I say, a Trinity alumnus. Thank you, Ali.
Thanks, Ken. I don't need it. Thank you very much, Ken, and welcome everyone tonight. We were just saying out the back that it is truly amazing that we have such a large panel, and we have all of you, and we've still got COVID, and you're all here, and we're eternally grateful. If you drove here tonight, around 60% of your car is made of steel, give or take. If you took the train, both the train and the tracks rely on steel. In fact, just next door in that beautiful domed reading room at the State Library, the reason it stays domed is because of steel. Steel is absolutely everywhere, and demand is growing. Right now, almost 3/4 of the world's steel is made using coal. Not the same coal that we use for heating, but metallurgical or met coal. And there's absolutely nothing that comes close to coal when it comes to cost and when it comes to availability. So the conundrum: more coal means more fossil fuels. But how do we get to net zero by 2050? And meet demand for steel, whether that's building a new car or whether it's building a new wind turbine. And tonight, in our hypothetical, the now outgoing federal government has backed a new steel-making coal mine. The world needs steel. Coal prices are through the roof. The local town needs jobs, and the planet needs saving. So whose rights take precedence? That is the challenge facing our expert panel tonight. So to introduce our hypothetical hat wearers this evening, at the end we have Dr. Nikki Williams. She spent more than 30 years in the resources sector, including in Shell's international coal operation. She's a former head of Australia's Coal Association. And tonight, Nikki is playing the role of the CEO of Rock Hard Holdings. It's our hypothetical Australian coal company, and it's just been granted government approvals to start a new met coal mine in central Queensland. To her right is Dr. Ken Henry, former Secretary at the Department of Treasury, former Chair of the National Australia Bank. And tonight, Ken's playing the CEO of Staffordshire Cash Bank. It's our hypothetical financial institution, and it's leading a multi-bank funding syndicate. Graeme Samuel is a corporate advisor with wide-ranging expertise in policy and corporate governance. He was part of the inquiry into culture at the Commonwealth Bank, and he's also reviewed the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act. Tonight, Graeme is donning a hypothetical hat as the CEO of Hardcore Capital, which happens to be the biggest investor in Staffordshire Cash Bank. So he is a friend, a confidant, and a possible thorn in the side of Ken Henry. Beside Graeme, we have Kelly Veve. Kelly is the Deputy Mayor of Isaac Regional Council, which is the largest resource council in Queensland. It's home to more than 20 operating coal mines, which generate around 1/3 of Australia's coking coal exports. And tonight, Kelly plays the Mayor of Paradise, our beautiful one day, perfect the next, hypothetical town, which is preparing to welcome new coal investment. Kelly's come a long way to be with us tonight, and we thank her. Jodie Sizer is a Djapurrung Gunditjmara woman. She's the inaugural CEO of the Great Ocean Road Coast and Parks Authority, one of Australia's foremost Indigenous leaders. She's also on the board of the Collingwood Football Club, which I promised we wouldn't hold against her. And tonight she's playing the role of the CEO of the Paradise Aboriginal Land Corporation. Beside her, we have Dan Gocher, who's a Director of Climate and Environment at the Australasian Centre for Corporate Responsibility, which is a research and advocacy organisation. It engages with listed companies on environmental and social issues, and Dan is very well placed tonight to play the role of climate campaigner. And last but not least, our Gourlay professor, Professor Dirk Matten. He's visiting Melbourne from the Schulich School of Business in Canada, where he holds the Hewlett-Packard Chair in Corporate Social Responsibility. Now tonight, the good people of Paradise have elected Dirk as their federal political representative. And there have been a number of commentators in the media who have found that a rather unusual choice. But in fact, Dirk grew up in a coal mining town in Germany, and he has persuaded the locals of Paradise that he is their man in Canberra. So please join me in welcoming our panel. Now, I will say at this point, of course, everyone here is role-playing, so the usual disclaimer that the views they express may not be their own. They may be, but we'll see. So it's Wednesday. It's day 3, new government. And quite frankly, Nikki, over at Rockhard Holdings, you're breathing a sigh of relief because you're rather sick of your proposed coal mine in the town of Paradise being used as a political football. Ever since it won government approvals and got a $175 million grant from the Northern Australian Infrastructure Facility, various politicians have popped in their 2 bobs worth. So now the election is done, you can get on with the business of actually raising the money that you need to build your mine. So you open your laptop, you start a new document. You call it the sales pitch. You're pretty invested in this, aren't you? Because a coal CEO needs a mine.
It certainly does need a mine, but I think it's really important to recognise that I'm drawn to that which I believe is inherently ethical. I don't want to spend my life working for something I don't believe in. And I think if you're talking about met coal, you're talking about the steel industry. They're almost indistinguishable. And nearly 2 billion tonnes of steel is produced globally each year. And currently, it can't be made economically and at scale using anything other than met coal. The EU has a list of critical raw materials, and met coal is second only to tungsten in terms of its criticality for their energy security. I think the steel story is the very history of development. I mean, you can trace it back to the 13th century BC. But if you think in more modern terms, slightly more modern terms, steel and certainly steam drove the Industrial Revolution. It drove the mechanisation and thus increased productivity of agriculture. It led to the development of railways and our ability to cross continents and planes, of course, to cross continents more quickly.
This is a very long sales pitch.
Well, I think it's important to understand that there is no part of our lives that isn't touched by steel. And it's also something which many people don't realise. About 30% of any steel product is recycled. And recycling is made possible. It's the most recycled material in the world because it doesn't degrade with each iteration. So that means it's a really important part of the circular economy. And I guess most importantly, steel is at the very core of a green energy economy, because almost every greenhouse gas mitigation technology relies on steel, wind turbines, solar, etc. So it's perhaps ironic that without steel, the Paris Agreement, greenhouse gas reduction targets simply won't be met.
Well, you're out of battery at this point with your laptop, I have to tell you. But we will come back to learn a little bit more about the business the business case for this mine in a moment. But of course, you've got, Nikki, to spend a little bit of time in Paradise, and you've got to know Kelly Veve quite well. Kelly, how pleased are you that this mine is now going to move forward? How important is it for the people of Paradise?
Well, I think any growth for regional communities is really important for us right now. You know, like most communities across Australia, we struggle to maintain services with our dwindling population. So obviously a new development would be looking for growth for our population base. Because let me tell you a little bit about Paradise. As a purpose-built mining community, it was built to function alongside industry, and that can make the way it's structured really complex and hard to untangle what is government's role and what is a multinational company's role. And that can make things really quite challenging at times. But this particular development, if our council, and I know we've done our job right, is to go in and set the policy settings of how this mine should operate in our region. So we have negotiated around a local residential workforce to help us increase our population base and increase our funding from government to maintain a standard of service in our healthcare, in education, in childcare. We would have negotiated accommodation packages for the investment on their housing strategy. We'd be talking about our local buyer policy, because a lot of the big companies aren't really structured to respond to small to medium businesses, and I think that we've worked that out. Our community would have a new water allocation, because as a purpose-built mining community, all of that allocation goes to industry, and we have to negotiate with companies just for our taps to turn on. Even if we did have our own allocation, our communities couldn't afford it. And that's one of those real intrinsic things of who's running the show here. Is it governments or is it mining companies? So we would negotiate around that, and we'd establish that provision. We'd have our infrastructure agreements to make sure that company invests in our road, in our waste management facilities, and that would be a range, and also the investment in a range of social programming to do with mental health and youth initiatives in terms of the social licence.
And Kelly, the demographics that you're dealing with in Paradise, I know that your partner works in the mines, but so do around 65% of the population. And the average age?
The average age of people in my community is 33, and probably about 2 to 3 times the state average of under 7s. So we know it's young families that are ultimately making that decision to move out to Paradise. And just remember, Paradise isn't 2 hours from a capital city, it's 2 hours from a traffic light. So it's hard to draw people out, and we know these young families are looking at childcare, they're looking at our education, they're looking at our medical services to make that decision to move to our community to keep them sustainable.
So, Nikki, clearly Kelly's on board and her community is on board.
Well, I think we've got the policy, we agree on that,
Yes.
though, don't we?
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
You've got to find $900 million to build this mine. Ken Henry at Stash to Cash Bank has been the head of the banking syndicate that you've used in the past. You know Ken pretty well. He's been expecting your call, so you pick up the phone and you have to make the business case to Ken. What do you say?
Ken, I mean, Rock Hard Holdings.
It's a fairly new company, that's completely understandable.
Yes. It's a pure play coking coal company. And we are a medium-sized business. So to address some of the issues that are frequently raised around local procurement, etc., we're well placed to deal with those things. Our asset is world-class, both in terms of the quality of the ore and, of course, the size of the recoverable resource. And the project is going to sit in that lowest quartile of the cost curve. With a tremendously low stripping ratio, and I know that sounds really ridiculous to most people, but that means that we don't have to dig up too much dirt and rock in order to access the ore, and so it's a very important part of the cost. It's an open cut operation. We're looking at 80-metre thick coal seams. So subject to the terms of the financing deal for the 900 million that we need, we estimate that payback will be in 8 years. Free cash flows in 9 years after full operation. So our operating expenditure is very competitive per tonne, and we're going to deliver very high margins and investment returns.
Now, at this point, Ken actually interrupts you because Ken has been having his morning coffee and he's been reading the stock market pages of the Financial Review, and he has noted that the 3 biggest coal mining companies in this country, their shares have increased by between 80 and 110% this year, and that's in a struggling market. So that was in the back of your mind, Ken, when you took the call from Nikki. What do you reckon? Good investment?
Well, yes, but, and it's the but. I'll have you, Nikki, talk to our finance people and our credit risk people. I assume the numbers will stack up. As you say, the numbers stack up. But, you know, we're a bank, a good bank, a bank that trades on its reputation as much as anything else. And when we are considering whether to lend to a venture such as yours, as you know, we don't question the science, we don't question anything you say about the importance of metallurgical coal to the globe's future, but not everybody sees it that way. And frankly, as you know, most people in the community have no idea that metallurgical coal is in any way different from thermal coal. I'm also wanting to know a little more about the fugitive emissions associated with the coal mining venture. These are things that are troubling analysts these days. You might wonder why, but they are. In particular, methane. So I'd be interested in hearing more about that. But I'm having to ask you to understand that from where I sit, I have to take into account these days things that go beyond the bottom line. So bottom line, it looks, you know, financially it looks promising on first pass. So we're interested to talk, but we're going to have to understand more about it.
So Ken, can I ask you whether at your bank, how you view, and when you're talking to Nikki, how you view your role? Is it all about ensuring the best return for your shareholders as long as you are operating within the law? When you talk about to Nikki the need to be aware of reputation, is that just because you don't want a bad headline, or is it because there's a greater responsibility on the bank?
So it's certainly not just the bottom line that is of interest to us. We took a decision about 6 months ago that we were going to lend nothing, no more to any new thermal coal mines. They're very profitable too. Like hugely profitable, but we took a decision. So obviously that wasn't for purely commercial reasons, but you should see some of our shareholders. I mean, some of them are truly incredible people, like amazing people. Difficult to talk to, but we have to have a good relationship with them for obvious reasons. You know, just as we're there to support good investments, including good investments in thermal coal mines, sorry, not thermal, metallurgical coal mines, no longer thermal, we have to rely upon investors to invest in us, to provide us with the capital that we need for our business to be viable, to continue. And so we cannot ignore the views that are raised in the community by other stakeholders. The fact is that if you like, our licence to operate depends upon them, and we understand that.
And of course, you also understand that at Stasher Cash Bank, one of your very big shareholders is Graeme Samuel from Hardcore Capital, and Hardcore and Stasher Cash have actually been joined at the hip for many years in terms of deals done. So you arrange a meeting with Graeme to talk about this proposal from Rock Hard Holdings. What do you tell him?
Graeme, it's a metallurgical coal. project, right? We've discussed these things for years and years, and I know you've had your reservations about projects that are associated with climate change, with climate emissions. But this is met coal. Can we get you over the line on this one, or you're going to make trouble for me at the AGM?
Well, Ken, I think you've got two problems. The first will be harming one part of your body because you're sitting on the fence. And the second is your eyesight. You might go to Specsavers because I'm wondering whether you mightn't have a myopic view about all these issues. You know, it's really interesting. And Nikki, can I speak to Nikki as well?
You can, as long as you're speaking to your microphone a little bit louder,
Right,
so
yeah.
Nikki can actually hear you.
Nikki, let me say to you, your opening pitch was all about steel. No one's arguing about steel just at the moment, but the real issue is there a better way of doing things than what we've been doing it in the past? Now, Ken, you know my view is that we need to be looking at alternative ways of doing what we have been doing traditionally in the past for year after year after year. The Industrial Revolution was about that. The technological revolution is about that. And what I'm wondering is you know, are you trying to gild the lily a bit by talking about met coal as distinct from thermal coal? Are you trying to sit on the fence? You know, if you're going to do it, then tell your guys down the line to go into all the investigation about the financial strength of what's the hard rock hard coal. So do all that analysis. But if you're not going to do it, and maybe this is something we've got to have a talk about, then don't waste their time and waste all your resources in doing the investigation. Just simply say to Nikki, it's not on.
Yeah, well, you know, but you're not our only investor, right, Graeme? I mean, we're joined at the hip. We've been working together for a long, long time, but I've got other investors who are saying, for heaven's sake, this bank that we've been investing in, it's shown less growth than any of its peers. You're just too soft. You're not hard enough, right?
Okay, so let me ask you.
So no, at this point, you two decide to adjourn, and and you will.
Well, I did want to raise one other thing about his investors, because see, what he's forgotten is he's got a substantial number of industry funds that are investors. Yeah. Now, it's been quite fascinating, but Hester has already indicated that it's not going to support, you know, in AGL, a demerger. It wants to. It's going to take what it calls a non-commercial view. Now, I'm not sure what your industry fund investment is, but we've got to remember the industry funds have got about $1 trillion under management.
The industry funds are big, and they're going to be big in Stash Your Cash Bank, but you two are going to have to adjourn for a round of golf and a further discussion, and we will definitely come back to you. But Graeme is in fact not the only potential spanner in the works here, because Rockhard Holdings, you thought, Nikki, that you had all your ducks lined up and all your regulatory approvals and everything that you needed, but there's a problem, because Jodie, you've just started in the job of CEO at the Paradise Aboriginal Land Corporation, and you've made your first task a review of the 700-page land use agreement that your corporation negotiated with Rockhard Holdings under the previous CEO. And it has to be said, the previous CEO was a middle-aged white man with questionable accounting skills, is how he's been widely described. How are you feeling about this 700-page agreement?
I am feeling concerned, to say the least. I would welcome the adjournment and would suggest to Nikki that she does not currently have a social licence to operate. From all that I've seen, as an Indigenous woman myself, we have a full appreciation of the rights of our First Nations people, our Indigenous peoples that have been living and practising the oldest living culture on the planet for over 100,000 years. And it seems that this agreement, in its formative period, has completely ignored the rights of Indigenous people that are clearly enshrined in the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples, where it is clear that there is a need for free, prior informed consent, and for all the documentation I've reviewed, that does not exist.
Do you feel that, so there's an issue around consent. 700 pages is a really long document. How do you get the resources as a local Aboriginal or Indigenous corporation to negotiate that? I mean, you need your lawyers, probably more than one. You need your accountants. You need your surveyors. You need a whole team, don't you?
Well, a whole team would be fabulous, and I think coming to grounds where we have talked about in the in the organisation's Reconciliation Action Plan about their desires to want to form a partnership and working together, it is clear that we're not negotiating on equal terms. And whilst information may be available, the principles of free, prior and informed consent, the principle of informed and free ensures that we have the right resources available to give an informed view about the details of the operation, and that certainly hasn't been done at this case. I think that there have been some underhanded dealings, in fact, I'd go so far, and I'd be concerned that the single bottom line approach that's not reflecting what we see as a quadruple bottom line approach that looks at the economic and the social and the environmental and importantly the cultural, that our priorities are for our generations to come and ensure that our culture is living for another 100,000 years. And this proposal does not pay attention to that.
Nikki, are you a bit blindsided by this because you maybe had faith in the previous CEO of the Indigenous Corporation?
Well, I mean, certainly there was nothing underhanded on the part of my company. What I think that there may well be merit in what you say, though, in the sense that the government was putting a lot of pressure on us to conclude that agreement before it would provide the seed funding that we've received in order to undertake some of the infrastructure works, etc. And that does suggest to me, subject to the terms of the finance agreement that is ultimately achieved, that we may well be able to talk in different terms about how best to meet your community's needs, which at this point you feel are not addressed. I'm certainly open to dealing with that, but I'd like to be able to do it in a collaborative way with you.
This is all sounding very good. There's no, the words are nice. It's about more communication and more consultation. You two go off for your own round of golf, different golf course to the other two, so you don't run into each other. But of course, it's not the end of the issues that are facing this mine, and particularly, I guess, for Ken, because the local media's got wind of a problem with the Indigenous landowners agreement. They've put it all over the front page, and Dan Gocher in Sydney, that's caught your eye because you were already aware that Stash Your Cash Banking has been looking at this mine and edging closer to investing in a new fossil fuel project, and you do note that they don't call it a fossil fuel project, but you do. You've developed quite a reputation as a climate campaigner. Does it make you hot under the collar?
You could say that, Ellie. And I do find it interesting that this is called the coal conundrum, because I actually don't think it's a conundrum. I think it's relatively easy. And the easy part is it means no new fossil fuels. The International Energy Agency, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change have been warning us, well, the IPCC has been warning us for 30-odd years that we are in a climate crisis. And that climate crisis now means no more new fossil fuels. We can continue to develop the existing fossil fuels that we have, but those new projects we simply can't develop. And banks like Stash Your Cash, they make these grandiose commitments like net zero by 2050, while they continue to approve new fossil fuel projects, and they're complete hypocrites. You've got hundreds of CEOs like Ken around the world saying that they're committed to the Paris Agreement while they're rubber stamping new projects left, right and centre. And to pick up something that Ken said before about fugitive methane emissions, this is a big issue, particularly for metallurgical coal mines. In Queensland, fugitive methane emissions are massively underreported, and there is no way to capture them from an open-cut coal mine.
That's not true.
From an open-cut coal mine, once you blast, those methane emissions are in the atmosphere.
So I'll let you argue it out in a minute,
Yeah.
but Dan, what about if Nikki undertakes or Rockhard Holdings undertakes to buy carbon credits that would cover the damage done from the fugitive emissions?
Oh, that's another scam in itself. So look, they're not one for one, right? Even if you were to plant a tree and that tree captures CO2, that's not the equivalent of that methane that's coming out of the ground, because methane has a much greater global warming potential, particularly in the short term. So they're not equal. This idea that fossil fuel companies can offset their emissions is an absolute fraud. And I hope that the CEO of Stash Your Cash Bank and their biggest shareholder are not supporting that idea, even if that is proposed by the CEO of Rock Hard Holdings.
Well, before they get to respond, because they're still on the golf course at the moment, Nikki reads an interview that you've given to one of the local papers where you talk about fraud and you make a number of allegations or statements or facts, as you would have it, along the lines of what you just said. Nikki, you ring Dan because you're worried about the sort of mood that he's putting out in the community. What do you say to him?
Dan, I get that you're concerned, and I agree with you that we have to transition our economy and global economies to a non-fossil basis. That might involve nuclear power, it might, it will certainly involve at some point hydrogen. But we're not doing it, and we cannot do it overnight. It just doesn't happen. The development of those alternative technologies to replace fossil fuels, gas, coal, etc., simply takes time. We just can't switch the country off in order overnight to meet your ambitions. And the idea that a company like mine is trying to do something underhanded is, frankly, you've got to be a bit careful, I might suggest, you know, in spruiking that thing. I'm perfectly happy to have a discussion with you, but I'm not happy for you to use a line which you project as a fact, but which is in fact just an assertion.
So Dan, at this point, you're a little worried about lawyers at 10 paces because you reckon that Rock Hard Holdings has got more lawyer ability than possibly you have. So what are you going to do about it? What pressure can you bring to bear on Stash Your Cash and on Hardcore Capital?
Oh, look, as Ken was saying earlier, he has a number of shareholders that are concerned about climate, not just Graeme. And at the next AGM, we plan to shut his meeting down. And, you know, we could bring a choir, we could bring a band, we can bring banners, you name it, but we'll make his life hell. But then on the flip side, we can go and speak to those shareholders that really matter, Graeme and his friends, you know, from the golf course. And we're going to try and get Ken and his colleagues voted off the board. Because I think, you know, if you're not going to hold the directors accountable, then who are you going to hold accountable?
Could also team up with the Teal Independents, couldn't you? Because their army has now, you know, been successful. They're looking for a new job.
Sure, yeah.
Well, as it so often seems to be the case, the government's a little bit late to the party, but finally, Dirk, here you are. You're the newly minted federal member for the electorate of Paradise, and you've just won an election promising a strong economy and jobs. And you also have a massive deficit post-pandemic, so you do have one eye on the rather nice royalties that Nikki's new mine are going to put into the coffers of the government. But the mine was approved by your predecessor, and you've got a background in business ethics. So how are you going to be all things to all people? You've got Nikki and her backers and her record coal prices. You've got Ken and his shareholders, Kelly and her people, Jodie and her community, Dan and the planet. You agree to appear on the ABC Insiders TV program, and you're asked that very question: whose rights take precedence?
Thank you very much, and thank you to my constituents in Paradise for entrusting me with 4 years representing them in our beautiful capital. Now, I am particularly proud that I am here as a representative of my local constituency, and I refuse to take any campaign contributions from rock hard companies. They offered me their plane to fly to Canberra. I'd rather sit in my 30-year-old Holden and listen to audiobooks for the journey back home. And in doing so, I came across a wonderful old audiobook, which is called The Silent Takeover by, what's her name? Forgot the name, doesn't matter. And this book is all about corporations taking over. So I have two priorities for my job, and I start with the first one, right? And you have to stop me, I'm a politician, I talk too much.
I'm fully aware of that, don't worry.
The first priority, and I get this in conversations already in the lobbies in Canberra, of all these towns where mining companies in Australia are active, These companies, and as my local mayor in Paradise told me, they provide water, they are responsible for the roads. They are in many ways the government locally, but a very feudal version, which we had pre-democracy, because they're not accountable. We have no say in what they do with their money to provide to the communities. So my first role as the sunny boy between all the fronts will be to start a new conversation with rock hard coal about their role in the community here and now, and how we and how the people I represent can get a stronger voice in how our communities are run. And I will work together not just locally, but across Australia with all MPs who have the similar situation of powerful mining companies basically controlling the everyday life of the people who voted me and others into office.
But you're stuck with this mine. It was approved by your predecessor. It's got all the regulatory requirements all lined up, assuming, of course, that Nikki and Jodie can work out their differences. So is it a question of trying to make this mine as good as possible for the town? Is that as much as you're able to do?
That's my first priority. I cannot judge what my predecessor did. That's water under the bridge. I deal with the situation as it is. So my first priority was, of course, to look at what happens today. But I was also voted into office by family fathers, by concerned mothers or grandmothers. So my vote is also there for me to carry a mandate for their children,
so
for the next
point,
generation.
David Spears interrupts you, as he's fond of doing, because you're going into political speak. He would like to move on. But when you come off air, you do make the decision that you're also going to talk to Kelly, because, of course, as Mayor of Paradise, she understands probably better than most what her community needs. Kelly, you've been watching the debate at a bit of a distance. You watched the Insiders program with Dirk. You know the issues that have been had with the Indigenous landowners agreement. How do you feel about what's going on? And I suppose particularly, how do you feel about Dan and his commentary about the fact that we just don't need this mine?
Yeah, I think it's really hard for people out in Paradise to really feel part of that discussion about climate change when it has such an aggressive timeline attached that has huge implications for my community. And that's why communities like mine out in the regional areas don't feel engaged. It feels like we're being dismissed, and it's not a real we conversation with people like Dan. It's what our community of Paradise is going to give up, and that's our existence, because that's what we've been built to function to do, for the greater good. But for people out in my community, you have to understand we're not seeing in the cities what they're giving up. It's a very divisive conversation for us. It's all about our contribution to climate change and making sure the carbon emissions are lower, but you know, it doesn't feel the metropolitan areas contribute to what is their sacrifice. I think that we need to, Dan and I need to talk about what that collective discussion could look like, so it didn't feel divisive, so that politicians can't come and leverage off this fear and anger that people in my community feel about people like Dan, who can come and tell people that have been doing this for generations that tomorrow we stop and we have nothing else to turn on. We've got no money, no funding, no plans. We've got no other choice but to move forward in what we do. And, you know, so I find it really hard to listen to that. It's my community's expense or nothing.
So you say all that to the local paper and they publish it. And Dan, that really strikes a chord with you. So you ring Kelly and the two of you pop down to the local Paradise Arms for a bit of a parma and a pot. What do you say to Kelly?
Look, I think politicians like Dirk and his ilk have essentially lied to coal communities for a very long time, and companies like Rock Hard Holdings have well, they've lied too. They've essentially lied for 30 years, and they've sowed disinformation about climate change, which is why we're in the crisis we're in now. If we'd actually taken action 30 years ago, then we wouldn't be in this situation.
But that's not going to help Kelly.
No, and look, we are getting, particularly where coal prices are at the moment, we're earning many billions of dollars in revenue from coal royalties. All we should be doing is apportioning a share of those royalties to fund transition authorities for these communities. And I'm not suggesting we turn the coal mines off tomorrow. Like, nobody is suggesting that. But what I'm suggesting is that these communities need assistance. So, we're taking money out of state government revenue, and you fund a transition authority that can retrain people into new industries and start those industries, whether it's in renewable energy zones, whether it's in mining new minerals, whether it's in new manufacturing. But the revenue is there. We can't say it's not.
That strikes a real chord.
And I'd say, mate, it's your shout. And I'd also say, it's quite condescending to say that we're believing everything mining companies are telling us as communities, because out there as purpose-built communities, we've been battling mining companies and governments just for existence since day dot. We don't believe everything they say. We know that we have to battle to hold them accountable, and that's what we do. So this whole concept that we're out there believing that our future is endless, and that, we're sitting there eating coal for breakfast at the dinner table with them is really quite, I think just shows maybe a lack of understanding of how the communities function.
Well, at this point, though, maybe your new federal political representative can step in, because he's walked past you at the pub and you can see things are getting a little bit heated. Would you take on board what Dan has suggested, and that really there should be a formalised process of a percentage, probably quite a large percentage of royalties going into transition?
Yeah, that would be part of my first priority, to prepare the transition. I think what we need more than the idea, we need a plan. And where I disagree with my friend CEO from Rock Hard Coal, and I'm so happy I can say these things frankly because I'm so independent, is that when it comes to transition to green energy, companies are very quick to say, oh, this takes a long time. But if we talk about quarterly earnings and making the mine profitable, time horizons are very manageable, and this works. So I think we have seen from other parts of the world, if there is investment, and that's my role. We need a role here for the federal government, for civil society. We need to work together across Australia, because there are many communities with the same problem. And one of the game's tricks that played us as politicians locally, that we only played a local game. So I will change that.
I have to say, though, in a former life, when I was the CEO of an association, I argued that we should have a royalties for regions program in each of the states where coal was produced. And the biggest opponent of that was always the state treasurer, who was most insistent that not the mining companies and not the local communities were going to tell him where he put, the money that he's collected, that was a sovereign decision and nothing to do with us.
And of course, so you can't blame poor old Dirk for that, because he's newly arrived. But he's going to do his best to try and change that. Now, of course, Graeme and Ken have had a very long game of golf, and they've had many a discussion. Where are you up to, Graeme, at this point? What are your outstanding questions?
Well, I go back to what I said before. I think that Ken's got to get off the fence. What I've reminded him on the golf course, aside from the fact that he's got a shocking slice that takes us into the rough all the time, but the other thing I've reminded him of is that 38% of the capital of his company is held by industry super funds. Then we've got about another 15%. So we're not talking about single strikes in terms of your remuneration. We're talking about the ending of your remuneration altogether. In fact, it could be the end of your job. So we do have a fairly powerful sway. And the other thing that I'm observing, because I've been reading the local paper and listening to what people have been saying on the radio and all, is that I'm just a bit bewildered. We've got a sense, and actually I was delighted to hear Dirk come up with some common sense towards the end, because a lot of what he said earlier on was just, sort of political nonsense. It didn't have any reality at all. But he suddenly started to talk common sense when he said we've got to focus on some structural adjustment, and he took up Dan's recommendation that we look at a sort of transition authority and start to deal with that. And the only thing I'd say to you is this, and Nikki, this won't make you happy, but I'd say to Kelly, just listen with a sort of an open mind on what might be done. It's not condescending. This is all about trying to recognise the plight of communities that are having to deal with changing circumstances, changing economies with the revolution that we've got. Ken, I'll get to you in a few minutes because you're still fence sitting. Jodie, I'd say to you that when Nikki from Rock Hard says to you that she wants to collaborate, just remember that there was another company whose name also started with R, that a little while ago said it collaborated with local Indigenous communities and then went and destroyed all their 46,000-year history because they thought it was good to be able to blow it all up so that they could make more money by mining. So just remember that. Sorry?
That's scandalous.
It was scandalous. I agree with you. It was terribly scandalous, right? And then, when people talk about carbon credits, I won't use the word. What was the word you used? I think, Dan, that was going to put you in court. It was
fraud.
A fraud. Yeah, let's not use the word fraud. Let's just call it a mass illusion, because carbon credits are all about just using a bit of money to buy the credit that might be there. It's the standard process that miners adopt, which is the offset process. And what I think we ought to be doing is to say in the first instance, before you get to offsets and the illusion of offsets, and you use the word fraud, I won't use it because it's best that you fight the court battle. But what we ought to be focusing on is the hierarchy of avoiding the problem in the first place. And if we can't avoid it entirely, then mitigating it.
Right, so Ken, you've just had this long conversation with Graeme, and it does seem fairly clear that he's not on board at this point. But one problem that had been across your mind, which was the apparent issues with the local Indigenous corporation and the landholder agreement, you get a phone call from Nikki because she's about to hold a media conference together with Jodie. Put two women on the job and it's amazing what you can achieve, because in record time, 700 pages appears to now be a lot better. Jodie, what have you got from Rock Hard Holdings that allows you to sign off on this land use agreement?
I think what's important in hearing Graeme's warning, I do appreciate that what we need to understand from leadership is that leadership is about doing the right thing. And by which measure are we undertaking that? We have got the future generations and the responsibilities for our cultural heritage, the future responsibility of our economic prosperity for our communities. We are not leaving this land regardless of how many coal mines come. The principles and how we move forward need to be bedded in a trusted relationship, bringing together those decision makers, which is often a small room of people at this table that have a full appreciation of the rights and the cultural value of the land in which we are generating revenue is critical. So a commitment from the board of Rock Hard and from our investing companies to come and meet with our traditional owners in forming that relationship, having a full appreciation for the value of the sites where we have genuine decision-making responsibilities, which means a position on the board of and ensuring...
And Nikki's agreed to a position on the board?
She has, and she's agreed to share in equity.
What?
Nikki, you have been a very hard negotiator, haven't you?
In record time.
In record time, as Jodie...
It's just been signed just prior to the AGM of the investors, so we found that very beneficial.
So that's indeed, this is very important. Nikki, how did you approach this? You've obviously felt that it was very important. You've been prepared to provide a seat at the board, a percentage of equity. All good?
Look, I mean, obviously the percentage of equity is always going to be a controversial issue, not only with our potential financiers, but also with investors generally, because of course it takes away from returns. But I think the point was made very clearly that doing the right thing actually means doing it. You're not just talking the talk, you're walking the talk. And I'm determined, as I said at the very beginning, that this company's approach to our community is one of collaboration and consultation. So I don't see that our company is going to be badly affected at all by giving a seat on the board to Jodie. I think that will strengthen our decision making, and that kind of buy-in is what really social licence to operate means.
So Nikki and Jodie have come to an agreement, but Ken, you're being increasingly put off by the work of Dan. You're getting phone calls on a regular basis from shareholders, but also customers who are ringing you day and night and saying that you don't have many branches, but the ones that you've got are getting really hard to get into because Dan's people are out the front placarding and making a lot of noise. You've always been quite open to listening to the views of activists or campaigners like Dan. So you give him a call, you ask to meet. Dan, do you go? Do you go to a meeting with Ken?
Sure.
Ken, what do you tell him?
That you can say.
Should we replay the one we did a couple of years ago, Ken?
Yeah. We've done this in real life, you know.
And that's why you're here.
The thing is this, Dan. As you know, the numbers on this mine stack up. Financially, it stacks up. In fact, it's very good. It's highly bankable. And you also know that if we don't bank it, one of our competitors will. You know that. There's plenty of finance out there for mines such as this. The question I have to grapple with is whether, knowing that, I should deny this mine access to funding from this bank, and you know that this bank is the most progressive. We are actually on a faster transition out of coal than any of our competitors. So this would be, I would ask you to consider that this is just a small bump along the road, if you like, and I'd ask you to go quiet at the AGM. I know you've got a lot of pulling power, and I know you can make our lives very miserable at the AGM, but I'd ask you to go a bit soft on this, because if we're not the ones who are banking this and helping with the transition out of coal, it will be one of our competitors, and you'll have no luck with them.
Oh, that's the classic drug dealer's defence, Ken. If we don't do it, someone else will. Congratulations. We're not going to go quietly. We will never go quietly. We're here for the long fight. Ken knows that.
Don't look at me, look at Ken.
Ken will be back next year, and the year after that, and the year after that. Look, all I've heard is more blah, blah, blah. Yep. You can tell us that the transition is quick, but we know it's not. I think the thing that Ken probably hasn't acknowledged here is that he's probably got a whole bunch of agriculture customers that are actually feeling the pain of climate change right now. And whether that's in the form of drought or floods, his loan book it's not this isn't just a one loan in the book that, is very bankable in Ken's words. He's going to feel the pain of climate across his loan portfolio.
Ken, you learnt something in your conversation with Dan that you didn't know, and that is that Dan has been talking to Graeme, and the two of them have got to know each other. They sort of have common concerns, if you like. So it's time for Graeme, if he hasn't already, to really give you the final answer so that you can decide what you're going to do. Nikki over there is still terribly hopeful that she's got a live project. Graeme, what do you reckon?
I cannot for the life of me contemplate why Ken's got off the fence on the side he's got off. And for Ken to say that competitors do the same, Ken, you seem to forget $1.8 trillion of funds under management in the industry funds and the public sector funds, and if you think any of them are going to allow your competitors to do this, you're dreaming, mate. Now, Dan, the only disappointment I've got for you is I don't think you'll be coming year after year and using up your valuable carbon with the paper that you'll be using for brochures and all those sort of things, because Ken won't be around to be talking about at the next AGM. But this is all very strange to me. We've got a whole lot of warring parties, and no one's talking to each other about what might be the alternative.
Well,
Can I-
did you? I was going to, well, first of all, Graeme, your main conversation's been with Ken because you are his major investor. So if alternatives are your game plan, have you said to Ken, why don't you take the 900 million that you're thinking of giving Nikki and put it somewhere else?
Well, I haven't been able to until now, and I'm very happy to actually now break the news to Ken about something that we've been working on very quietly, very confidentially with a number of investors. But I think that this will leave everyone around the table, with the exception of Nikki, and that doesn't worry me, because Nikki, and by the way, Jodie, let me just warn you, I heard what Nikki had to say. It's all weasel words. Don't take too much notice of it.
But she signed an agreement, Graeme.
Yeah, she signed an agreement. You know what the agreement said? That she'll be one member of a board that will resolve to proceed with this and disregard entirely the interests of the Indigenous communities in the local area.
So, Graeme, before you tell us what you've been working on that might resolve the problem, I do just want to ask Nikki, are you still hopeful?
I am. We just can't make the transition without using metallurgical coal. And I think that the fantastically skilled communities, regional communities, have the capacity to work on hydrogen and to use their skills in the future. But it just won't happen today. So it's going to happen in parallel. So that kind of innovation is super important, and when you have profitable companies, they can afford to invest in that kind of innovation, and that's what we're going to do.
And Jodie, I didn't ask you before, but when you've made this now agreeable arrangement with the local Indigenous corporation and with Rockhard Holdings, how do you view zero emissions in that agreement? Are you taking the view that Nikki is, that it's a transition process and you need to be able to fund it, and you're happy with the step process?
Part of our process is bringing the stakeholders together. That for us as Indigenous peoples, we operate on an Aboriginal terms of reference where sustainability is that priority. That's how we have occupied and cared for this country for so many generations to come. So bringing that is an absolute priority for us, and it is on the table for the discussion.
So, Ken, okay, tick, 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 tick. You've got to make a decision. Are you in or are you out?
You know, the Indigenous issues would have been a showstopper, no question. Absolute showstopper. There's no way I could have sold that to our board, and I haven't told you anything yet about our chairman. Very, very difficult bloke to deal with, I can tell you. I'm merely the CEO. Of course, he's worried about the numbers, but this guy is a bit of a chicken. The thing that worries him the most is standing up in public at an AGM and defending something which doesn't pass the pub test, right? In fact, he's already been abused by government ministers several times for doing things that don't pass the pub test, for having a tin ear, you know.
That's not Dirk, though, of course.
No, not Dirk. No, I'm talking about the former government. And I really am. And really has had enough. And last year, the board suffered a first strike against its remuneration report, but of course the strike had nothing to do with remuneration. These things never do. It was orchestrated by Dan with the assistance of this bloke here who claims to be a very strong supporter of the bank. Well, you know, a fair weather friend maybe. So the position that the board is in is that it's terribly worried about how it's perceived in the community, and I mean in the community at large. They're not courageous people, these people who sit on bank boards. And the last thing they want is to see a second strike against the bank. That would lead to a spill of all their positions. They really like the directors' fees that they've been getting. They don't want to see those fees put at risk. So I'm really struggling to see how I can get this one over the line with the board. I myself think it's a wonderful investment. I'd love to be able to extend the money to you, Nikki, but you've got to understand the real world. And in the real world out there, climate change is issue number one. And bank boards, they just don't have the courage that would be needed to be able to stand up in public and defend a project such as yours. So I'm sorry, Nikki. Good as it is, I just don't see how we can do it.
What a pathetic response, Ken. Here you are. It's not my view. My view is, Nikki, that this is what you're saying. Yeah. My view is that we should do it, but I've got a really difficult chairman and I've got a really difficult board.
Well, maybe at this point, Nikki suggests that Ken might like to depart the Stash Your Cash Bank and join Rock Hard Holdings, and you two could go on the road and see what else you can drum up.
I could suggest that, but I won't. I won't, because we're certainly capable of doing a roadshow to potential investors to raise finance from elsewhere. But I think the point about the lack of courage of the board really speaks to the reason why, you know, a lot of people think that banking and finance is a load of rubbish, because it's just about increasing the velocity of money, not about generating real wealth. And this project will generate real wealth for the community and for the Australian community as well. And it is going to be used to make the products that make a green energy economy possible.
So Nikki is continuing to shout that from the rooftops, and she's getting a lot of support from Jodie, because you're very disappointed about the outcome for your town. You're getting a lot of support from Kelly, because there's a lot of benefit that would flow to Paradise. Jodie, you're sitting by and just watching all of this. Dan, you're feeling a great sense of victory, because so far you've managed to persuade Graeme and Ken. Dirk, you're going to stick to your promise and work on a transition. But maybe all is not lost, because on the Sunday morning, Kelly, you get a phone call from a very excited Graeme. He hinted earlier that he was working on something.
Kelly, so let me break the news to you, and the only one who's going to be unhappy about this will be Nikki, but frankly I don't care. I've had advice from my investment banker, who just rang me early this morning. I might say at 4 o'clock, he's over in New York. God knows why he didn't recognise what the time was, but he rang me 4 o'clock this morning, and he said this: a consortium deal has now been agreed involving Mike Cannon-Brookes, Andrew Forrest, Alan Finkel and Origin Energy, the owner of the soon-to-be closed Eraring coal-fired power station, and of course Hardcore Capital. We're going to create in Paradise a multi-billion dollar centre for the development of hydrogen, renewable energy power sources and biofuels. Alan Joyce of Qantas is assuming non-executive chair of the enterprise, as he's keen to pursue the development of sustainable aviation fuel. And there's a major Chinese automaker backed by the US billionaire Warren Buffett, who's expressed a strong interest in joining the consortium. So they're going to make this development. The number of jobs that will be created within your community will be many times that will be created by the coal mine. This is exciting times indeed for the future prosperity of Paradise and Australia's role in developing a sustainable energy economy.
Well, Kelly, I just have to say, you could do both.
And Kelly puts down the phone on this Sunday morning. She's got kids that she's got to attend to, and she thinks...
But can I just say, before I put down the phone, I would thank you for telling me to listen earlier. You know, I really appreciate that direction. And I'd probably say, Graeme, that's really adorable, because we've been hearing about these sorts of things, I think, at least for the last 15 years, and my community's seen none of this. We have no idea how our skilled workers will get from A to B. There's been no investment in skills and training. And I would say this to you, Graeme, that perhaps if you're going to put your money where your mouth is and actually get some runs on the board and give people of my community a little bit of assurance that there's some action behind your words, I think we might have a discussion. But I think maybe Instead of us listening to you, maybe you need to come out to the community and understand how they feel, and perhaps listen to them a little bit first before you move further, you know, with this deal.
But you've got to understand that they will also have to listen to us, because you've got some highly reputable and committed people there, multi-billionaires, you know, Andrew Forrest, Mike Cannon-Brooks, you know, this massive automobile manufacturing company, electric automobile
And at this
company.
point, your mobile phone runs out of battery. And the conversation is finished. But Kelly goes off and hopes, like hell, that this actual investment will turn up in the town of Paradise. And if it does, backed by the new government representative, could be a glorious future. Let's be optimistic. Please join me in thanking our panel very much. A huge thank you to all of you for coming tonight, and again thank the panel. It's just been wonderful to have you here and to get some understanding of how, you know, the road to green, it's not necessarily all smooth. There are lots of different conversations that have to be had, and at least we started some of those tonight. So thank you very much for being with us. Thank you.